As the Chicago Bears prepare for the NFL draft, the two biggest wildcards that could disrupt what Ryan Poles wants to do are Colorado quarterback Shedeur Sanders and whoever the New England Patriots pick at number 4 overall.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1, and you can follow the podcast at Locked On Bears on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. On the show today, I want to go through the biggest wild cards that could be disruptive to what the Bears want to do in the NFL draft. The spots and the players, the people that make things most difficult to predict. We'll start with Colorado quarterback Shedeur Sanders, who, depending on how teams view him and what team takes him, will have a drastic impact on who is then available for the Bears to pick at 10, or what potential trade options could be there for the Chicago Bears at 10. I also see the New England Patriots at number 4 as being perhaps the most individually pivotal spot of any of the 9 teams drafting before the Chicago Bears do at 10, because many of the Patriots' needs align with a lot of the Bears' needs, and they could take any of the players the Bears are interested in and then shape how some of the teams that pick after them then no longer have that player available, and whether the Patriots go, say, like an offensive lineman versus a skill position player versus a defensive lineman can go a long ways in changing what could be available for Chicago at 10. And then we'll go through a few other prospects that are just kind of polarizing in their evaluation, so that these are players that could go before the Bears pick at 10 or could go after the Bears pick at 10, depending on how teams feel about them. That can be a little bit of a wild card to work through as well. But I think the biggest one for me is Shedeur Sanders, not because of the Deion Sanders Colorado attention that comes with Shedeur, but purely because Shedeur Sanders is the consensus number 2 quarterback in this draft class. You know, if he were farther down the draft board and say Jackson Dart were the consensus number 2, then it would be him, right? But specifically, the best quarterback not named Cam Ward is a massive wild card for the Bears here, because he's someone who teams could absolutely fall in love with and be in love with already and say, we got to make him a top 5 pick because we see him as our future franchise quarterback. And you could also have teams look at him and say, there's a lot to like, but this isn't a guy we got to get into the top 10 to get, and, you know, we'll feel a lot more comfortable taking him in the mid to late first round. You know, somebody in the Kenny Pickett style of range, or like Mac Jones went a little bit later. Like some of these kind of quarterbacks that you might like, but it's not a got to have him in the top 10 of the draft. And where he goes or doesn't go will have a pretty significant ripple effect on the Chicago Bears. Like if we look at first round quarterbacks or first round teams, right, assuming Shedeur Sanders is going to go sometime in the first round here, probably earlier rather than later, there's a handful of teams that could all be in the Shedeur Sanders potential landing spots list, some stronger than others, right? I think it starts with the Browns at 2. We don't know yet for sure whether the Browns are going to take Shedeur Sanders, and that could kind of clear the board for everybody else, and then there's no really question from there. There's been a lot of hype for the Browns to potentially take Travis Hunter as well and Abdul Carter. I would guess at this point they're not going to take Shedeur Sanders, and it's really the draft starts at number 3 as to whether the Giants pull the trigger there, but it depends on whether the Browns take Travis Hunter or Abdul Carter will then maybe shape who the Giants would take instead. But nonetheless, your quarterback needy teams, Browns, Giants at 3, the Raiders at 6 are the next spot there. That could be a Shedeur Sanders landing spot for sure. I think the Jets at 7 haven't gotten as much of that conversation because, you know, they signed Justin Fields this offseason, of course. They signed Tyrod Taylor as a veteran backup. They drafted Jordan Travis last year in the 5th round. So it's not as though they have this huge hole for a quarterback, but at the same time, it wouldn't shock you at all if they took a quarterback in the draft because Fields is there on a short-term deal. Everybody else is not necessarily the QB of the future there. So the Jets are in the conversation, even if they're not as strong of a candidate as the Browns or the Giants or the Raiders right before them. And then the Saints at 9. Those 5 teams all pick before the Chicago Bears. And any of those 5 teams, it wouldn't be a complete stunner if any of them took Shedeur Sanders. And if any of those teams take Shedeur Sanders, then that means one fewer non-quarterback comes off the board. Because if Cam Ward goes 1 and Shedeur Sanders makes it past the Bears at 10, then presumably it'll be 1 quarterback and then 9 other non-QBs. And with the Bears not being in the market for a quarterback, you would like to see as many quarterbacks go before the Bears pick as possible. Like ideally, Shedeur Sanders goes 2 and the Giants take Jackson Dart at 3, right? Like if you could get 3 quarterbacks in the top 10, that's not going to happen. At least I don't think. Although they invited Jalen Milroe of Alabama to the draft, so they might think he's a potential first-round pick as well. So the quarterback draft can always be interesting, and they do tend to go higher than we might think they will. But ideally, you want 3 quarterbacks in the top 10 so that only 7 non-QBs come off the board, and the Bears have a better chance of landing one of the top players. And from Chicago's perspective, it doesn't really matter whether it's 2, 3, 6, 9, or 7, right? As long as it's before you, that means one more player you might like has a better chance of falling down, as opposed to if Sanders is still on the board, you're not going to take him. So you'd rather somebody you're not going to take, you'd rather that guy be gone so that somebody you might want can still make it a little bit farther down. But then you get the other side of the Shedeur Sanders wild card here, where it's like, okay, if Sanders gets past all those teams, Browns, Giants, Raiders, Jets, Saints, and gets to the Bears at 10, does that become, you start to get in the conversation of a spot where teams would be more willing to trade up to land Shedeur Sanders to make sure they get him? That maybe trading from the teens or the 20s up into the single digits in the top 10 might be too expensive. But once you get to 10 and outside of the top 10, is it easier to make that trade up? Well, I guess it depends on how far you want to go and who you feel like you have to get past. Because if Shedeur Sanders gets to 10, who else is going to be super, super eager to take him? I think the Steelers at 21 are kind of the big one everyone's got circled as a potential Shedeur Sanders landing spot. And then I think there's a handful of maybe teams that wouldn't stun you if they took a quarterback, but maybe not likely at this point. The Dallas Cowboys at 12. It seems like they've eternally trying to replace Dak Prescott. He's had a lot of injuries. There's a lot of the Sanders connections there that certainly can't rule them out with Jerry Jones. The Indianapolis Colts at 14 have been rumored to maybe want some more significant competition for Anthony Richardson. I know they have Daniel Jones there, but could they still go after a younger quarterback? Because Jones isn't a really long-term option there. I don't think they're out of the question. The Seattle Seahawks at 18, they signed Sam Darnold to a 3-year deal, but not necessarily locked in for all 3 of those years, and maybe not your long-term quarterback option. Get a rookie to develop with Sam Darnold, kind of like J.J. McCarthy was for 1 year. I don't think that's out of the question. And if we really go far down, I don't think the Rams at 26 would trade all the way to 10, but with Matthew Stafford continuing to age and rumors about he sought a potential trade and they kept him around, the Rams need a long-term quarterback in the future. So there's about 5 teams in the first round after the Bears pick that could be a Shedeur Sanders landing spot. And if I'm the Steelers at 21, do I have to get past the Seahawks at 18 and the Colts at 14 and the Cowboys at 12 to make sure I land Shedeur Sanders? Or am I comfortable staying at 21 and seeing if he falls all the way down to me? The one problem I see for the Bears here is that, say a team like the Steelers wants to move up past the Cowboys at 12. Why would you give up extra picks to go to 10 when you could go to 11 in the San Francisco 49ers instead and potentially have to give up less in a trade because you don't have to go as high to get there? I mean, the only possibility would be like if the 49ers say, no, we don't want to move because there's a player here we really want. Well, then you have to go to 10 to make sure you get past the Cowboys at 12. But it does become a real challenge here. And you can see where now there's like 10 different teams that could be involved in the Shedeur Sanders conversation that makes it hard for us to predict where Shedeur is going to go. And then the Bears to predict, is he going to be gone? So then we have more players to pick from. Is he going to be there? And will we have trade opportunities? It's a lot of moving parts with the Colorado quarterback that makes it a pretty significant draft wildcard here. He's the prospect that I think is the most kind of disruptive to draft plans. The team that I think is the biggest wildcard here that could throw things off for the Bears is the New England Patriots at 4. And we'll go through why a team picking 6 spots before the Bears could have a pretty significant impact on who the Bears end up picking next on Locked On Bears. This is a message from sponsor Intuit TurboTax. taxes was waiting and wondering and worrying if you were ever going to get any money back, and then waiting and wondering and worrying some more. But now taxes is matching with a TurboTax expert who could do your taxes as soon as today. An expert who gives your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return, while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on your day. An expert who will find you every deduction possible, file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy. All so you can get the most money back, guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worries. Now this is taxes. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live full service. Real-time updates only in iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. There's a lot of different directions Shedeur Sanders could go. A lot of different teams, a lot of different spots, and we won't really know how teams are going to evaluate them, and it's sort of hard to predict. Similarly, I think there's a lot of different directions the New England Patriots can go with the 4th overall pick, and most of those directions are the same direction the Bears might want to go. And so, depending on which of the Bears draft targets the Patriots takes off the board, will then shape the likelihood of who else is going to fall at 10. Because when I think about players or sort of team needs for the New England Patriots, like what players could they take? Because of course you're going to take best player available, not just like need per se, but like for example, the Patriots are not going to draft a quarterback just yet. You know, took Drake May just last year, right? Or two years ago. Last year. They just took Drake May. So like they're not going to take a quarterback, but they're a team that could go offensive line. They're a team that could go defensive line. They're a team that could use a running back, that could use a tight end, that could even use a wide receiver. Like any of those spots could be in the mix for the 4th overall pick. And, you know, there will be debates, and there already are debates in New England about, okay, is Penn State tight end Tyler Warren worth the 4th overall pick in the draft? And that's not out of the question for the Patriots there at all. Is Ashton Jeanty, the Boise State running back, is he worth the 4th overall pick in the draft? Not out of the question that somebody like Mike Vrabel, taking over the Patriots, could want to get his version of Derrick Henry. Not that Jeanty and Henry are built the same way at all, but just the superstar running back, right? Like that workhorse that they can lean on and build their offense around. You could see someone like Vrabel saying, yeah, Jeanty is absolutely worth it at the 4th overall pick. You could see if Michigan defensive lineman Mason Graham is still available at the 4th overall pick as expected. The Patriots could look at it and say, hey, that's the best player available. We could use some defensive line help. Let's go make sure we get him. And then also on the offensive line, they could use an upgrade at left tackle with Will Campbell, or they could move Armand Membu to left tackle. Like the offensive lineman could go there. The defensive lineman could go there. The wide receiver could go there. Ted McMillan maybe isn't even out of the question. There's a top 5 pick there. Tyler Warren at tight end, Jeanty at running back. The Patriots could go in any of those directions. And outside of wide receiver, those are all spots that the Bears would absolutely be interested in. We'd all love to see Mason Graham from Michigan make it to 10 where the Bears pick, or Ashton Jeanty, or Will Campbell, or even Tyler Warren. Like those are all Bears players. And so depending on who the Patriots take, that takes one option away from the Bears, but then also categorizes what's left for everyone else until you get to the Bears pick. And it could be like, well, the Patriots are the only team there that might take, you know, this specific player. And if the Jaguars want to go a different direction and the Panthers want to go a different direction, all of a sudden the Patriots are the team that gets in between you and the guy you might want to land. Like when I look at this draft spot, what I want to do is sort of separate this into kind of the big 4 categories here. There's defensive lineman Mason Graham, as far as like Bears draft targets here. There's running back Ashton Jeanty. There's tight end Tyler Warren from Penn State. And then we'll simplify this by saying Will Campbell from LSU. We can kind of call it the offensive line category of Membu or Campbell. You can sort of it's not worth separating those and debating those. And I think the Patriots are a team that could be good for any of the 4 of them. The rest of the top 10 draft picks, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, Patriots are the only team I think that are game for all 4. Other teams have some stronger likelihoods than others. We can start to piece together sort of a choose your own adventure book of like, if the Patriots take this guy, then who does that leave for everybody else and who can make it down for the Bears, right? So if the Patriots say take Mason Graham, then that leaves Graham off the board, which would have been the Jaguars' likely preferred pick. The Jaguars don't necessarily need a running back or a tight end, but they could use some offensive line help, so maybe they would then be more likely to go Will Campbell. And then if Graham and Campbell are off the board, do the Raiders then take Jeanty to get their running back, or do they go Shedeur Sanders at that point? Is there another position that they might opt for instead in that spot? You get to the Jets at 7. They don't necessarily need Genty or Graham, but they could take Tyler Warren at that spot if Genty's already gone and if Graham's already gone and Campbell's already gone. Well, then boom, all 4 of you guys are gone in those first 4 picks. Or you could see, the Patriots took Genty and kind of surprised everybody. Well, then the Jaguars could grab Graham and the Raiders could still take Shedeur Sanders or whatever. And then the Jets could go Will Campbell or Tyler Warren, or if Tyler Warren makes it to 8, the Panthers could take Tyler Warren. And then even like the Saints at number 9 are kind of the last team in the way here, where the Saints could take Ashton Genty as a sort of replacement for Alvin Kamara, who's on his last legs. They could use an offensive lineman like Will Campbell. There's been a lot of talk about the Saints being interested in Tyler Warren as a tight end, despite all the tight ends they already have in New Orleans, just feeling like this could be best player available. And to me, it seems like any of these 6 teams could take Mason Graham, but the Patriots, Jaguars, and Raiders seem the most likely there as having the bigger needs at that spot. I think any of these teams besides the Panthers could take Ashton Genty, but I think the Patriots, Raiders, and Saints seem like the strongest options there. I think just about any of these teams could take Will Campbell. The Panthers are the only team that don't necessarily have a spot at left tackle for him, but if they just want to get him as a really good guard, I could see the Panthers taking somebody like Campbell and playing him a guard. But like the Patriots, Jaguars, Raiders, Jets, and Saints could all use more help at offensive tackle on their offensive line. Any of those teams could be in the mix for offensive line. And like the Patriots, Jets, Panthers, and Saints could all be in on Tyler Warren. Like the Raiders aren't going to take Tyler Warren because they've got Brock Bowers and Michael Mayer. And the Jaguars could use a tight end, I suppose, but they drafted a guy last year that they like, so we'll see if they want to pull the trigger on Tyler Warren. I don't think it's out of the question, but I do think it's a little bit less likely. And so it's sort of this like landmine game, right? Of like, okay, how do any of these guys maybe fall to the Bears? And it's like, well, it depends on who the Patriots take. Because if they take the running back question out of the board, well, then all the other teams that might have wanted running backs might go offensive line or tight end. Or if they take Mason Graham off the board, well, then Genty continues to fall, and maybe he could make it to 10 if other teams end up going offensive line instead. And all those, almost 5 of those 6 teams all have a spot on the offensive line. Like, are Campbell and Membu going to come off the board there, right? Like, the wild cards then are like, if any other prospects, jump into that range there. But it really starts with the Patriots wanting all 4 of those guys that the Bears might also want in that spot. And they could really do the Bears a favor, say if they help Mason Graham continue to fall a little bit, or if they help Will Campbell fall. But if they take Campbell off the board right away, then all those other offensive line needy teams might take Membu, and then none of your offensive line options are there. But if Campbell and Membu go off at 4 and then 6 or whatever, then does that increase the odds of Genty falling to 10? This is what I mean with all the different moving parts and why I think of the Patriots as the wild card here, especially if they take Tyler Warren from Penn State 4th overall. Like, I think that will throw a lot of the draft world into a little bit of a frenzy of like, holy crap, tight end number 4 overall. Now we got to kind of scramble and figure out what's going to happen next year, because that's not necessarily something we were expecting. I think there's a lot of different ways that could go. And there's a lot of different prospects outside of those 4 that are Bears targets that could also go in the top 10 and throw some wrenches into what you're expecting here. Maybe good news for the Bears if it's guys that you're not that interested in. But I think in this draft class in particular, where there's a really strong couple of guys at the top in Abdul Carter and Travis Hunter and Mason Graham, perhaps, and then there's a lot of kind of guys in a similar category, you're going to see a lot of wide range of opinions on certain prospects. And there's going to be guys that maybe we wouldn't view as a top 10 pick that ends up getting picked top 10 because a team really likes them. And there's going to be guys that we thought would be surefire top 10 picks that fall outside of the top 10 because just not every team is going to evaluate them the same way. So I want to go through some of the more polarizing prospects in this draft that could go way earlier or way later than expected next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at Monarch Money. Do you ever check your bank account and wonder, whoa, like, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it can be easy to lose track, but that's where Monarch Money comes in as your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Because Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. I have the Monarch Money app on my phone. I use it every single day, and it's nice to be able to track my accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So I don't feel like I'm just managing my money, but I can actually build wealth. I love, you used to have one app for my credit card and one app for my bank account and one app for my investment accounts. I can get it all in the Monarch Money app so I can track it more easily and plan long-term goals. And for me, having that kind of control over my finances has really been empowering and makes me think more about how I use my money and getting the absolute most out of it. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, promo code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first 12 months. So Shedeur Sanders is definitely a polarizing prospect as well and could go in a wide range. He's kind of the big one that I think has the most potential suitors before and after the Bears. I think the Patriots are a team that can go in a lot of directions outside of quarterback. But then there's a handful of other players that I look at in this draft class and go, man, like it wouldn't shock me if they ended up in the top 10, and maybe it wouldn't stun me if they were outside of the top 10. And there's some different guys in different categories here that I think could go a long way towards busting a lot of mock drafts, right? When we try and predict who's going to have the most accurate mock draft, I think there's going to be some curveballs and some left turns in the top 15 of this draft where there's not very much consensus among NFL teams on some of these different prospects because they're going to value certain traits in different ways or certain skill sets in different ways. And when some of these guys are similar, that's when similar in our eyes, or there's not a lot differentiating them, then there's more room to disagree when two players might be close. And that means some teams could actually like them a lot more or a lot less, as opposed to like there's a huge gap between number one and number two. Most people are going to agree that one is a lot better than two, and so there's not a lot of disagreement there. But if there's not much of a gap between the two, then you're going to see more of a wide ranging of opinions there. And so when I look at this year's draft class in particular, I think, first of all, Will Campbell from LSU, like the arm length thing, is he a guard, is he a tackle? That's going to have a huge impact on this draft. It certainly did for Peter Skoronski in 2023 when he was coming out of Northwestern. He was a guy we talked about, I think, in the lead up, like that whole final season at Northwestern, as like surefire top 10, maybe even top 5 pick, blue chip left tackle. He ends up getting the third offensive lineman drafted outside of the top 10 at 11 overall. Like I could see a similar future for Will Campbell where he goes to the Bears at 10 or the 49ers at 11 or Cowboys at 12 or the Dolphins at 13. And it's like, boy, for a while there, we thought he could go to the Patriots at 4 or he could fall outside of the top 10. Like that's the kind of range Will Campbell could have in this draft, depending on if you view him as a blue chip left tackle, if you view him as a guard, if the arm length is a concern, or if it's not. I really think he could be a fun one there. Same with linebacker Jalen Walker from Georgia. He's kind of a hybrid edge rusher / off-ball linebacker, do-it-all, jack of all trades. He's good at blitzing and get after the quarterback. He can hold up in coverage and in the running game pretty well. He's a really intriguing prospect. But he's a prospect that's not necessarily going to fit into every team's defensive scheme. I don't think he's a great fit for what Dennis Allen wants out of his defensive ends in particular. But like, could a team like the New England Patriots view him as an edge rusher for them in their defense that can do a lot of different things I can't think of their head coach's name right now. I just said it like 14 times. In Mike Vrabel's defense, you know, he could be a team that goes there. But maybe Pete Carroll and the Raiders, they like bigger defensive linemen, and you know, especially the defensive ends there. Like, unless they could find a hybrid role for him, or like, you know, with the Panthers, maybe not so much, but the Saints and that defense with Brandon Staley, like, does he want him as an edge rusher? Like, some of these 3-4 teams could like him. Some of these 4-3 teams might not. And there's a player who could go as early as 4, 5, 6, or could drop like 14, 15, 16. If enough of these teams just don't view him as a scheme fit and other teams like other players, he could be off the board before the Bears pick, or he could be on the board 5 picks after the Bears pick. It's really, really a wide range there. And the more guys that go early, the more likely the guys you do want come off the board. Like Tedaroya McMillan from Arizona, the number 1 wide receiver in this draft class by a lot of standards, but not necessarily universally the case, right? Like he could be somebody who goes in the top 5 in a team like the Raiders at 6, or maybe even the Patriots at 4, or you know, the Jets at 7. Could they say, yes, we want this wide receiver as the number 1 guy on our board? And some teams will look at, you know, Matthew Golden from Missouri as the number 1 wide receiver in this draft class instead and say, well, we don't need Ted McMillan. He can fall into the teens and towards the 20s there. Like, throw in another big part of this conversation. Pretty much all of the edge rushers are super polarizing in this draft class, where it's like you got the bigger bodied, low production guys like Mykel Williams and Shamar Stewart that have all the physical tools in the world. And you think, man, I could take him and mold him into a top flight pass rusher, but you haven't really seen him do it consistently at the college level. So some teams look at that and say, no thanks, I'm not touching that with a 10-foot pole. And some teams look at them and say, sign me up, give me this freak athlete, and I will be the one to unlock him and fix him. And those guys could go in the top 10. Those guys could go in the 20s. I mean, it really just depends. Like, I personally am a big fan of James Pierce from Tennessee. I would take him with a top 10 pick in the draft. The production is there. The physical tools are there. Like, he's the best of both worlds. Mike Green from Marshall was even more productive, though, and he could be the first defensive lineman off the board, or the first non-Abdul Carter edge rusher off the board, the first guy of this group. Like, I could see these four guys, Mykal Williams, Shamar Stewart, Mike Green, and James Pierce, going in any order, and it would not surprise me. Who goes first, who goes second, who goes third, who goes fourth? You could, I would say, flip a coin, roll a 4-sided die 4 times. You know what I mean? Like, that's, you could rearrange them in any order. I wouldn't argue with you on that. Of like, oh yeah, no, that would totally make sense if you mock drafted. You could even throw Donovan Azarique from Boston College in there, but for me, I think he's another tier below those 2 guys, or those 4 guys. But then 2 other interesting names here when we talk about the gap between number 1 and number 2 in a draft class. The tight end Colston Loveland from Michigan is the consensus number 2 tight end in this draft, and the running back Omarion Hampton of North Carolina is the consensus number 2 running back after Ashton Jeanty. So it's like at tight end, it's Warren and then Loveland. At running back, it's Jeanty and then Hampton. And we've seen a really wide range of opinions on what the gap is between number 1 and number 2. Some people have Loveland above Tyler Warren even as number 1 tight end. But like, there's a world here where Tyler Warren and Colston Loveland, 2 tight ends, go in the top 12, 13 of this draft. Like, maybe even in the top 10. Like, they're both very, very well regarded. And if Tyler Warren ends up going super early to the Patriots at 4, could Colston Loveland go to the Panthers at 8? Absolutely. Like, I don't think that's out of the question. Or the Saints at 9. I wouldn't bet my money on it per se, but this is a weird draft with not a lot of consensus on these guys, and you could easily see Loveland go way earlier than I think we thought for a while now. Same thing with Omarion Hampton at running back. Like, if Ashton Jeanty goes at 4, could Omarion Hampton go at 9 to the New Orleans Saints? I don't think it's out of the question. Could he go to 10 at the Bears? I would not personally take Omarion Hampton with the 10th overall pick. I would be disappointed with that pick and feel like it wasn't the best use of the Bears draft pick, but it would not stun me completely. We've already seen people compare Omarion Hampton and Ashton Jeanty in this draft to being a similar caliber of Bijan Robinson and Jahmyr Gibbs 2 years ago, when Robinson went 8th and Gibbs went 12th. And there's a feeling that Jeanty and Hampton could go in a similar range, 8 and 12, roughly around that spot. You know, whether that's 7 and 10 or 7 and 14 or 6 and 12, you know, whatever it might be, that we could see both of those running backs go in the top 15. Or it could be a weird draft where we see 2 running backs and 2 tight ends all go in the top 15 of this draft, because some teams might really love Loveland or Hampton and not see a huge gap between the second-ranked tight end and running back versus the first-ranked tight end and running back. And so it's going to be a wild draft night. That's why I wanted to really get into the wild cards here as we're sort of planning together the draft, because we're entering this phase here shortly where everyone's going to start overthinking the draft, and people are going to make these foregone conclusion assumptions. Say, well, of course, this team's just going to take that player. Everyone says, oh, of course, the Jaguars are just going to take Mason Graham. There's no question about that. Lock it in pencil. And it's like, well, maybe not. Like, let's not to get too carried away. Or, of course, you know, the Saints would never take a tight end. Or, of course, I'm trying to think of another good example. Of course, the Bears would never take Omarion Hampton or whatever. It's like, you never know. So now that we kind of have a sense of these wild cards, we can go in and say, yeah, here's some of the more unpredictable things that we should be keeping an eye on as we think about who could be there and who could not, and as we write mock drafts and project what the future might be for your Chicago Bears. It's gonna be a fun, busy draft night. That's why we love the NFL draft and why it's fun to talk about the draft here on the Locked On Bears podcast. Make sure you hit the subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, because that's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. If you're looking for a second listen, you can always find more draft talk on Locked On NFL Draft with Damian Parson and Keith Sanchez, or you can hear more football talk on Locked On NFL. It comes out twice a day, once in the morning with Tyler Rowland and once in the afternoon with Tony Wiggins in the barbershop. I co-host Tuesday mornings Locked On NFL, so it would be, not tomorrow morning's Locked On NFL as it comes out. So you can always check out that out for more football talk. Just make sure you come on back tomorrow for another episode of Locked On Bears and another opportunity to bear down.